item 5, flood management and multi-hazard assessment progress. I presume there's a team coming to the table. And could I invite the chair of the committee to present the report?
Thank you. Well, this came to the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee, and we had an in-depth conversation about this. And the thing is that we have been assured that there's no planned works that will be delayed as a result of going down this path, and we know the importance of actually having to do this investigative work at a really detailed level to get the best result. The Flockton remedial works have actually proved that. I think they were many months in preparation. People were getting frustrated that nothing was happening, but the end result has proved successful. $48 million project delivered on time and on budget. So there will be no other works that are already planned that will be delayed by this, but this is going to ensure that in the light of the many hazards that we have now, exacerbated by the drop in land, by the earthquakes, that's also having a negative impact on all our stormwater, and of course climate change, and as proven by last week's event, increased storm surges, intensity and duration of storm events. We don't know how bad these are going to get and how frequent they're going to become. So we've got to make sure that staff give us the right advice on where to spend the money and what to do. And so the ITI committee has formed our recommendation here to actually support this. I've just got to open my screen up again because it went to sleep. And with a couple of extra recommendations in there, that that we prefer proceed with option 1, that we note the land drainage recovery program will be returning to the Heathcote community with an update in October, that the land drainage recovery program will be reporting to council on the options for short-term measures for the South Shore estuary edge, so that's always been in the mix, and that the recovery plan will be prepared following the recent events we've had and will include community engagement. And number point 2, is that still in there, or have we taken that out, number 2? We addressed that last week. So basically that's, we had a long discussion about this at the committee, and this is what we have recommended for council. So I think it might be a good idea for staff to give us another update as well. Anything to add that I've left out?
No, Pauline, that was a wonderful synopsis. Thank you, Councillor Cotter. I think I'd just like to iterate that the work that this is leading towards is establishing adaptation pathways. We have an uncertain future here in Christchurch, and international best practice leads us to attempting to identify adaptation pathways. What that really means is making decisions in the short term and making that don't preclude or inhibit long-term options. That's very much what we're seeing in South Shore, for example, and other works that's gone on within the Land Drainage Recovery Program. And it's very important for good outcomes for our community and the whole community that we understand those adaptation pathways in a complete and robust way, and that this work will provide technical information to support that. And floodplain management plans are a way for us to understand these hazards. The risk is, of course, that if we launch off into single hazard approaches, that we may later regret some of those decisions and a significant infrastructure investment. And it will require significant addressing some hazards could require significant infrastructure investment, and we want to make sure that those decisions are robust and sound. I'd also just like to iterate again Councillor Cotter's words around the work that's already been acted. The Land Drainage Recovery Program has progressed a significant amount of work last financial year, and will be continuing to do so this financial year. It's a real big year for us. We've got a lot going on, a lot of physical works going on across the city, and these works aren't being held up by this investigative process on the multi-hazard work. Thank you.
Okay, questions first, David East.
Thank you. Look, I'm supportive of this approach. I do have some reservations, however. Mainly around some of the disadvantages that were noted in the paper, and also the fact that we are proposing to do 7 additional technical reports at potentially the cost of $1.6 million. I'm a bit concerned about the level of expenditure that's required to finish this project off, and equally I'm quite concerned when I read the paper and look at the options and the advantages and disadvantages to progressing with this. And the disadvantages that I note are that there are a greater cost and extended time frame for implementing hazard mitigation options, and secondly that there will probably be additional community apprehension resulting from uncertainty associated with the potential findings of the multi-hazards analysis, the cost and the time to complete this work. We are dealing with some communities that have a heightened distrust of council at this stage. I use that word not too goodly, but there is a level in our community that in some areas we have been going for some years now, evaluating options, and I'm concerned that this piece of work is going to delay it further.
I'm just going to pull you up, because if councillors are going to call across the council chamber, it's not appropriate if you take a point of order and draw my attention to what your concern is, and I will direct Councillor East to ask a question, but I think that I just would like a little bit of understanding around the table. There are people that have been really badly affected by the floods. We've got a group of staff who've worked extremely hard over a long period of time, and we will focus in one of the resolutions around in terms of how much has actually been done. It is a very long process, but I would like everyone around this table to be treated with respect. Councillor East.
Thank you. So my questions really are twofold. One, will we see some evaluation or some report on the costings of these reports? I find that expenditure quite significant. And secondly, Tom Parsons has referred in his early address there on a number of occasions to an adaptive pathway. I don't see anything, and I'd like the resolution to acknowledge the fact that we need to adopt an adaptive management process to our approach to multi-hazard mitigation, rather than sort of adopting strategies that go straight to the extreme position of climate change. So I would signal my intention a desire to see an amendment to that resolution to include wording that does give effect to adaptive management in the process of dealing with multi-hazard mitigation processes.
So that would sit in the proceeds with the preferred option, which is to progress the multi-hazard analysis by completing further technical studies and developing floodplain management plans with a particular focus on adaptive management strategies.
Yes,
yep.
That would be. I would be very happy to support the resolution with the inclusion of that wording, and some advice from staff. I don't need it as to how we're going to deal with these 7 reports and the cost of them.
Okay. Would you like to respond on the costings of the report? Because I mean it is an issue that I also had a concern about in terms of.
Thank you. I'll just probably put that in the context of the land drainage recovery program. We brought a report up last year on options for the estuary tidal barrier, you may remember, and the cost estimates at that stage were hundreds of millions of dollars, and I believe that investment in investigation to identify adaptive pathways could lead to significant cost reductions overall within our current financial framework, and that is a very wise investment to make, because if we were to lead to a solution which included significant improvement, say, shall we call it that type of infrastructure investment is going to be very, very expensive. And an adaptation pathway would lead us to potentially smaller investments in the short term and subsequent investments later once more information is available. And in order to have those adaptation pathways presented, we need to do some investigative effort. We do have rigorous project management controls inside the program inside council, and these projects will be awarded and appointed within standard policies and frameworks for procurement. So we have the frameworks in place for delivering value for money for council.
Yeah. What was the cost of the tidal barrier again?
I wouldn't like to leap to that off the top of my head. Sorry.
Yeah, it was squillions. You know, it was
300 million.
300 million. Yeah.
In the total context of providing flood protection on upstream river stems as well, was hundreds of millions, very significant.
Yeah. So who did I have next? Yanni and then Glenn.
Thank you. I had several questions. One is there any relationship to the mayoral task force on flooding, and can we get a report back on what we actually said we'd do in that report?
I've already asked the land drainage recovery program to do precisely that, so move on.
So the last council meeting this was raised as well with the South Shore stuff.
I wasn't here at the last meeting. I've asked the land drainage recovery program to do an analysis of what the mayoral task force did proposed, what was done since, and what is still to be done.
And what's the time frame for that? Would it be useful to put a time frame in place for that?
I don't know that that's necessary right now, but it is going to be done.
So when I read this, my understanding is the reports won't be done until December 2018 if everything goes to plan. And what I can't reconcile is the work that's happening around the Heathcote that's coming back in, I think it's October 2017, or the model will be done after that, but there'll be some usable results. So I can't reconcile why this won't slow down what we do in the Heathcote. Can you just help me understand what's the time frame for actually doing something to address the immediate flooding risk in the Heathcote?
Perhaps you could talk about the 4 stormwater basins, one of which is already completed, and the other 3 that are already on budget and commencing this summer.
And the multi-million dollars that has already been spent in doing that.
So the people that are getting flooded in the Heathcote area, in the Heathcote River area, and through Woolston and Opala, like, we can talk all we want about the storage basins, but actually when it rains, it's incredibly stressful. And as we've seen, there is a very high risk of flooding in that area. So the work being done on the citywide model has been delayed and has been pushed out. I think it was March 2016 we're supposed to get that report. It's now still being worked on. So what is the time frame for some solutions for that Heathcote River model that we've been working on for so long?
Point of order, could staff please answer the question about the stormwater basins?
That wasn't my question.
Yes, you did.
Why can't they ask a question
how they have mitigated the flooding in Heathcote?
I'm sorry, but that is not your role, Councillor Cotter.
I'm asking you a question.
Councillor Johansson has asked a question about the timeline on the Heathcote, and I'll hand it over to staff.
Yeah, so I can answer those questions. So you're right that our focus has been on the basins because that's the space that we've been able to work in. Storage such as those is a very adaptive means because they're kind of like the foundation, I guess, for the works that we're doing. So we needed to get that foundation there and underway, and so we've really focused on that.
What is the total storage capacity that will hold?
Approximately 800,000 cubic metres. We're still working on that. It's possibly likely to be slightly more than that. So those works are underway, and I understand the need then to look at those areas which I'm sort of looking from downstream of Colombo Street through to Radley Street. That's our focus now. And we're going to the Land Drainage Working Group tomorrow with the preliminary work done on options for there, knowing that we've got this time frame that we've committed to of going back to the communities in those areas in October of this year.
So it would be okay for a councillor, for any councillor that was interested to attend the Land Drainage Recovery Program meeting tomorrow to get an update on things. Is that all right, Pauline? You're the chair of that. If councillors want to attend, they can attend.
I don't know, I mean, it changes the whole nature of it. Can we get an indication of how many it would be? It's just a small, nimble group.
Sarah and Yanni. Is that all right? So just solves the problem.
The question in terms of the multi-hazard approach. If we're coming up with solutions tomorrow, which is great for the Heathcote River, then what does this process that we're being asked to consider do to those solutions in terms of time frame?
So I just caution away the word from solutions, because that gives the impression that we're going to fix it. You can never completely fix flooding. There will always be a larger event that may come along. So the options that we'll be looking at will be still within that adaptive space. So the people who are working on those options are actually the same people who are involved in the multi-hazard. Both Tom and I are across those projects, so we're feeding in the learnings from the multi-hazard back into the Heathcote floodplain management options. It's also partially a question of timing. Those residents are looking for options which deal with the problems that they're experiencing now. We know that in some areas, particularly in the lower reaches, those problems, flooding problems, are going to get worse with time. And to me, that's where the multi-hazard comes in, looking at what are the longer term kind of issues in this area and the longer term options. We're looking to work in the space of what can we do now that is still no regrets. We're not going to do something that paints us into a corner that we can't get out of, but still addresses the issues that are faced by residents now and through the next sort of medium term. So that's the space we're working in, the space that we can still work in whilst this other study work is being undertaken. So the simple answer is no, it's not going to delay us going back to the community in October, and no, the options that we come up with will not be ones that are incompatible with what this study is looking at.
Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work on this, and I accept the realities of the conditions we face and the big picture of climate change. My question is, how might this work change information already on land information memoranda? So would it be bound up in some kind of comprehensive statement, for instance? Have you got some thinking on that?
So there's several pieces of information already on the land information memoranda, and many people are familiar with their own LIM and LIMs across the city. So we do have general flooding information on the LIM at the moment. The improvement in the modelling and the improvement in understanding the coincidence of storms, particularly on the coast, will improve that information. So there will be more precision, more accuracy in that information on the LIMs. It will also, we're also doing quite a lot of work on vulnerability to liquefaction across the city, and at the moment there's just a blanket statement on LIMs, and also for some people some information about the old technical categories, the TC1, TC2, TC3. So that information will also be considerably improved and can improve the information available to people who are interested in property across the city. So yes, it will improve the information on the land information memoranda, and of course it will also improve the information available to anybody doing any works in these areas, and to for council works and infrastructure as well.
David East?
Sorry, just a follow-up on that.
Okay.
Just what I'm getting at is, think of one, resident Sutton Place there. They said, when the council does this to us. So what they were saying was another layer of information. So but I think what I'm hearing or saying, and I'd just like to clear it though, is that this isn't necessarily new information. It's more greater precision around what already exists.
Yes, that's correct. So everybody on the flatland, for example, already has a liquefaction notation on the limb, so that will improve that information. And for some areas, the information may come off completely because we have a better understanding of where liquefaction is likely to occur and where it's not. So it will be better information rather than new information.
David East.
Thank you. Just with reference to 1C up there, the recovery plan, could I ask when this would be likely to be prepared? Are there any expected actions out of it, and how will the community, what form would the community engagement
Mary Richardson.
Quite quickly for this response, but we won't be overlapping the work that's being done by the land drainage, so it will dovetail into the work that they're doing. So we expect it to be in about a month, and it will have targeted actions coming out of it. But there is ongoing work during the phase of recovery too, so it's not, we're not just sitting around writing a plan, we're actually implementing things as it happens.
All right. Yanni?
I just wanted to ask what's happened with the temporary flooding defences budget that we've approved, and is that budget being considered for immediate either recovery planning or more urgent interventions in the short term?
I don't know that this is the place to direct the question. It was money that we put on budget back after the 2014
it was more recent
floods.
than that.
No, it was put on budget after the 2014 floods as part of the long-term plan.
Defence Fund.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that work's going to be looking at what that could be used for as part of the recovery plan. So the Civil Defence are working with land drainage to work out where we could target that money.
All right. Now, Pauline, with that amendment, are you happy to move the motion?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Do
fine.
I have a seconder? Mike Davidson. Is there any discussion? Yanni? David?
You know, I think, you know, obviously this is an important work to be done. What concerns me is the risks that have been identified, and I'm not convinced that we've got enough mitigation against further delays of coming up with options to mitigate the current situation. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of post-earthquake when, you know, the government comes out, announces zoning, you know, technical categories, then it comes out with another layer of geotech, another layer of, a whole nother category of things. And every time there's just another study, another report that is needed before decisions are made so that people can move on. So I appreciate that this is important work. I will reluctantly support it, but I think what's really important is that there's clear, simple communication back to the communities that are really badly impacted on what's happening, particularly with flooding at the moment. You know, some of these communities were identified in the Mayoral Task Force as being really badly impacted on, and yet, you know, since 2014, it's hard for them to understand the complexity of the work that's been done and why solutions or mitigations haven't been put in place or aren't in progress to the extent that alleviates some of that risk. So, you know, this is important work. It is hard to understand why we haven't done this as part of those flooding model plans, and maybe there's a learning there. We are spending a huge amount of money on infrastructure, and a lot of money has actually already been spent on repairing infrastructure in many of these areas through the SCIRT program. So it's a real shame, I think, that we didn't do this sooner, but you know, it is what it is. I think what's really important is that we do get that report back on the Mayoral Task Force on flooding. We do get that recovery plan in place, and we actually do look at what we've heard is that short-term interventions to alleviate some of the concerns and stresses that people who have been flooded repeatedly since 2014 can look at some sort of relief. So, you know, it is a complicated issue, and again, I come back to some simple communication around the complexity of it to the communities that feel like they're just waiting and waiting and waiting would be really useful, so that they can understand what we're doing, because I know that we have been working hard trying to address these issues, but it is concerning, obviously, that this could further delay getting those mitigations in place.
David and then Glenn.
Thank you. Look, with some trepidation, I also will support the resolution. I did note in some of the earlier comments that there are no planned delays to existing works and proposed projects, but I do have two reservations, I suppose. One is around the cost, which we've discussed earlier, and secondly, the disadvantages that were listed as against option one, and I'll read them again, that the greater cost and extended time frame for implementing hazard mitigation options, a great concern, and even, of more concern to me is the possibility of probable additional community apprehension resulting from uncertainty and associated with potential findings of the multi-hazards analysis, the cost and the time of the completion of the work. So, as I said, with some trepidation, I will support it, but I don't particularly want to see this piece of work being used as methodology to potentially delay other work. So that's my major concern.
Glenn.
Thank you. As I said before, we need to face the facts of climate change and what is happening to our city as it continues to respond, and as we continue to respond to successive events. I know since you've been mayor, you're running on average calling a local event one a year. To me, I think that's an indication of a changing kind of environment. What I would say here, and give particular stress to, is item C, and will include community engagement. So I think it's how we go about that, how we promulgate information, how we take people with us, that will be crucial. I've seen an example of where it went well and where it has gone badly. So I think, for me, going forward, that's the crucial thing, that we take people with us and that we not unduly agitate and disenfranchise our communities too. The comment by that man in Sutton Place stays with me is another thing the council does to us. So I think that's really important, that we ensure we take the community with us.
Yep. Pauline.
Well, just in closing, I think it's looking like this is going to get support, and I'm pleased about that. But the other thing to remember is that the council, has a legal requirement to be fiscally responsible. So when we're talking about potential massive engineering works, we have to make sure that we give our staff the opportunity to get it right, and that's why I'll be supporting going down this track, and bearing in mind that none of the planned works will be delayed. I think we've been told that several times, so that gives me comfort. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you.